The words landed like a hammer against my chest as I stood frozen behind the sliding glass door. Honestly, the best gift Dad could give me is to disappear from my life forever. My son Kieran's voice carried easily through the evening air, casual and dismissive, as if he were discussing the weather rather than demolishing 29 years of my devotion. The chocolate cake in my left hand trembled. 29 candles waited in the kitchen drawer, but first I'd wanted to surprise him with this homemade masterpiece. Under my right arm sat a small velvet box containing my grandfather's pocket watch, a 1952 Hamilton that had been passed down through 3 generations of Whitmore men. I'd had it cleaned and polished, imagining Kieran wearing it to job interviews, maybe to his wedding someday. But there he stood on my deck, surrounded by his friends, reducing 29 years of birthdays, baseball games, homework nights, and hospital visits to a punchline that split my world in half. By 7:45, the lights of police cruisers would be painting my yard in red and blue, and everything would change forever. Hey friend, if you like real gripping stories where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished, this channel is your new favorite place. Please subscribe. The April evening had started with such promise. Golden light poured through my kitchen windows as I put the finishing touches on Kieran's birthday cake. Chocolate with vanilla buttercream, the same combination I'd made for every birthday since he turned 5. The frosting spelled out Happy 29th Kieran, in careful blue letters that had taken me 3 attempts to get right. I'm Nathaniel Whitmore, a structural engineer who spent 35 years designing bridges that could withstand anything nature threw at them. At 58, I approached problems with methodical precision, whether I was calculating load-bearing capacity or planning my son's birthday celebration. Everything had to be perfect, especially since this was the first birthday we'd celebrated together in 2 years. Kieran had been distant lately. At 29 he was still living in my house, still relying on my financial support, still treating my generosity as if it were his constitutional right. He hadn't worked in 8 months, claiming the job market was impossible, and that employers were discriminating against his generation. Meanwhile, I paid for his food, his phone, his car insurance, his credit card bills, and the roof over his head. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was about family. The pocket watch felt heavy in my hand as I examined it one final time. The golden case caught the kitchen light, and I could see my grandfather's initials etched into the back. EW, a man's worth is measured by his word. Grandpa Edmund had worn this watch every day of his working life, and my father had carried it through Vietnam. Now it was time to pass it to the next generation. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Kieran's friends gathering on the deck I'd built with my own hands. There was Flynn, the aspiring musician who hadn't held a job in 3 years. Zara, Kieran's on-and-off girlfriend who saw my house as her personal hotel. And Camden, whose main accomplishment seemed to be having rich parents who funded his entrepreneurial ventures. The smell of grilled burgers drifted in with the sound of laughter. I'd bought top-shelf beer, hired a catering service for appetizers, and even installed a new sound system last week when Kieran mentioned wanting better music for his party. No expense was too great for my son's happiness. I shifted the cake in my hands, trying not to smudge the lettering I'd piped so carefully. Through the glass, I could see Kieran gesturing with his beer bottle, clearly holding court. This was my moment. The grand entrance with the homemade cake and the family heirloom that would show him how much he meant to me. But as I reached for the door handle, Flynn's voice cut through the evening air. Man, your dad went all out. New sound system, top-shelf beer, catering crew for the appetizers. What came next would haunt me for the rest of my life. Kieran's response was smooth and dismissive, delivered with the casual cruelty that only comes from years of taking someone's love for granted. Yeah, well, he's trying to buy my affection as usual. Thinks money fixes everything. I froze, my hand inches from the door handle. The words hit me like a physical blow, but they were just the beginning. Camden chimed in, at least he cares. My old man barely calls. I'm tired of him breathing down my neck about getting a job, moving out, taking responsibility, Kieran continued, his voice gaining momentum. Like he doesn't understand how hard it is right now. The economy, student loans, the housing market, everything stacked against people our age. I watched him take a long drink from the beer I'd bought, standing on the deck I'd built, complaining about the support I'd provided. The irony was suffocating. And then came the line that would split my life into before and after. Honestly, the best gift he could give me is to disappear from my life forever. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Flynn laughed, a sharp, immediate sound that cut through me. Camden shook his head with a smirk. From her chair at the patio table, Zara looked up from her phone just long enough to call out, "You could always move out." With what money? Kieran shot back. He controls everything. Acts like I'm still a kid instead of a grown man who can make his own decisions. More laughter rippled through the group. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching my son perform my humiliation for an audience that found my devotion entertaining. I took one slow step back from the door, careful not to make a sound. The cake tilted dangerously in my hands. I steadied it just in time. The velvet box under my arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 29 years of sacrifice, love, and unwavering support had just been reduced to a punchline. Every baseball game I'd attended, every fever I'd nursed, every college tuition payment I'd made, every time I'd put his needs before my own, all of it dismissed as manipulation and control. I set both the cake and the watch box on the kitchen counter without turning on the light. The dining room table was still set with the plates I'd chosen that morning, thinking we'd all eat together before the cake. It looked like a stage set for a play nobody wanted to perform. I leaned against the counter, letting the part of my brain that had designed bridges and solved structural problems for 3 decades take control. Outside, Kieran was telling another story, something about me embarrassing him in front of a car salesman last year. The laughter rose again, a sound that had once brought me joy but now felt like mockery. My mind began working through the situation with the same methodical approach I'd used to solve complex engineering challenges. Kieran was 29 years old, unemployed for 8 months, living entirely off my financial support. He had no savings, no credit history, no rental history, no concept of what independence actually cost. He lived rent-free in property I owned, ate food I bought, drove a car I insured, used utilities I paid for, and operated under the assumption that my support was permanent and unconditional. And now he wanted me gone. I didn't remember deciding to sit down, but suddenly I was in the chair at the head of the dining table, staring at the watch box. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory, "A man's worth is measured by his word, Nathaniel. Everything else is just noise." I'd spent 29 years measuring my worth by how much I could provide for Kieran. Shelter, food, education, opportunities, unconditional support. I'd given him everything and he wanted me gone. The analytical part of my mind took over completely now. This wasn't about anger. Anger was emotion, and emotions clouded judgment. This was about cause and effect, action and consequence, the fundamental laws that govern both engineering and life. I began mentally cataloging the situation with clinical precision. Kieran had no legal tenant rights since he paid no rent and had no lease. My property ownership gave me clear legal authority to determine who could remain on the premises. If he were arrested for trespassing tonight, county jail processing would take approximately 14 days, providing a window to implement consequences without interference. The solution began crystallizing with mechanical precision. I stood up, my reflection in the sliding glass door looking unfamiliar, the narrowed eyes, the set jaw. This wasn't the face of a hurt father. This was the face of a man who'd finally stopped negotiating with someone who didn't respect the terms. I could still hear their voices outside, but they seemed distant now, like background noise while I worked through the problem. This situation required the same approach I'd used for every complex engineering challenge. Define the problem, analyze the constraints, develop a solution, and execute it systematically. I didn't open the door immediately. Instead, I went upstairs to my bedroom and retrieved the folder containing my property deed, insurance documents, and utility bills, all in my name. Legal documentation of ownership, irrefutable proof that this house, this deck, this entire property belonged to me alone. From my bedroom window, I could see the party continuing below. Kieran was flipping burgers on the grill I'd bought, acting like he owned the place. The sight crystallized something cold and clear in my chest. I returned downstairs and approached the sliding glass door with the measured pace of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. When I slid it open, the sound of conversation and music rushed in along with the smell of smoke and beer. "Kieran," I said loud enough to cut through the chatter, "can we talk privately?" He turned, casual and unconcerned. "If it's about the grill, I'm keeping an eye on it." "It's not about the grill." Several heads turned our way. Zara glanced up from her phone, eyebrows raised. Flynn took a slow sip of his beer, watching us with the interest of someone anticipating entertainment. "All right, Dad. What's so urgent?" I gestured toward the house. "Inside." But he didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and stayed put. "Whatever you've got to say, you can say it here. We're all friends." The challenge was deliberate, designed to put me on the defensive in front of his audience. But I'd spent 35 years dealing with difficult contractors and stubborn clients. I knew how to handle public confrontations. "All right," I said quietly. "I heard what you said earlier." His expression didn't change. And I want to know if you meant it." Meant what? That the best gift I could give you is to disappear from your life forever. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Flynn smirked like he was watching a reality show. Kieran didn't hesitate. Yeah, I meant it. You hover, you micromanage, you make everything about your expectations. I'm almost 30, Dad. I don't need you running my life. The words hit like individual hammers, each one driving home the reality of what I was dealing with. This wasn't a momentary outburst or alcohol-fueled mistake. This was calculated disrespect delivered with an audience for maximum impact. You live in my house, I said evenly. Eat my food, drive the car I pay for, use my electricity, my internet, my everything. And you want me gone? He shrugged with practiced indifference. I didn't ask you for any of that. You chose to give it. That's on you. Camden clapped him on the shoulder. He's got a point, Mr. Whitmore. Parents choose to have kids. You don't get a medal for feeding them. The casual dismissal of my choices, my sacrifices, my love, it was like being slapped by a stranger. But I filed it away as data. My son viewed my support as obligation, not gift. His friends reinforced his entitlement. None of them recognized the voluntary nature of adult support. I'm sure you'll get over it, Kieran continued with a thin smile. And when you finally do disappear, I'll miss the free rent for maybe a week. Then I'll figure something out. Zara laughed. You're terrible, she said, but her tone suggested she found it charming rather than cruel. I looked at each face in turn, my son, his friends, his girlfriend, all standing on my property, drinking my beer, eating food I'd provided, and finding my humiliation entertaining. Not one of them looked uncomfortable with what he'd said. That was when I knew this wasn't about one bad night or too much alcohol. This was who Kieran had become, and these were the people who enabled him. You want me gone? I said, stepping closer to Kieran. Be careful what you wish for. I turned and walked back into the house, sliding the door shut behind me with deliberate calm. Behind the glass, I could hear them resuming their celebration, probably relieved to get back to the fun without the awkward family drama. Upstairs in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. The number for the police non-emergency line was already in my contacts, a precaution I'd programmed years ago when considering home security. The dispatcher who answered was professional and patient. Pinecrest Police, how can I help you? I need to report trespassing on my property, I said, my voice steady. I've asked the individuals to leave and they're refusing. Are you in immediate danger, sir? No, but I want them removed from my property tonight. We'll send a unit. Can you provide the address and details? I gave her the information systematically, like I was reporting a structural defect on a bridge. The dispatcher assured me officers would arrive within 30 minutes. While I waited, I began the second phase of what my engineering mind had already labeled the solution. I opened my laptop and started researching real estate agents, property attorneys, and relocation services. If Kieran wanted me to disappear from his life, I would grant that wish more completely than he could imagine. The first call went to Anna Morrison, a real estate agent whose aggressive marketing and quick sales had caught my attention in the neighborhood newsletter. Her website promised fast closings for motivated sellers. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional despite the hour. Anna Morrison Real Estate. Ms. Morrison, my name is Nathaniel Whitmore. I need to sell my house. Quickly. Her tone shifted, sensing opportunity. How quickly are we talking, Mr. Nathaniel? 14 days. Cash buyers preferred. I'm willing to price aggressively for a fast close. There was a pause. That's ambitious but not impossible in this market. Tell me about the property. I gave her the specifications. 4-bedroom colonial, 2,800 square feet, updated kitchen, hardwood floors throughout, 2-car garage, professionally landscaped yard in the desirable Pinecrest neighborhood. I can have a comparative market analysis ready by tomorrow morning, she said. If we price it right, cash buyers will respond immediately. Are there any particular constraints I should know about? The current occupants will be relocating soon. The house will be vacant and available for immediate showing. Perfect. I'll call you first thing tomorrow. As I hung up, I could hear voices getting louder outside. Through my bedroom window, I saw the first police cruiser turning into my driveway, its headlights sweeping across the yard. The knock on my front door came exactly 28 minutes after my call. Officers Grant and Ramirez stood on my porch, their uniforms crisp and their manner professional. Evening, sir. You called about trespassing? Yes. I've asked the people in my backyard to leave my property, and they're refusing to go. Officer Grant consulted his notepad. How many individuals are we talking about? 5 including my adult son. They're having a party without my permission. Officer Ramirez nodded. We'll need to see some identification and proof of ownership. I handed them my driver's license and the property deed. Officer Grant examined both documents carefully, then looked at me with the expression of someone who'd handled similar situations before. Just to clarify, sir, your son lives here? He's been staying here, but he pays no rent, has no lease, and contributes nothing to the household expenses. He's a guest, and I'm withdrawing my permission for him to remain on the property. Understood. Let's go talk to them. We walked through the house toward the sliding glass door. The party sounds were louder now, voices raised in animated conversation, someone laughing at something that probably wasn't as funny as the alcohol made it seem. When we stepped outside, the music stopped mid-beat. Conversations cut off abruptly. Kieran turned from the grill, confusion sliding quickly into defiance. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice carrying the edge of someone who'd had too much to drink and not enough consequences. This, I said calmly, is me granting your birthday wish. Officer Grant stepped forward, his voice professional and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, the property owner has asked that everyone leave. If you don't comply voluntarily, you'll be charged with criminal trespassing. Flynn stepped forward, puffing himself up with liquid courage. Come on, man. It's his birthday. We're not hurting anyone. Doesn't matter, Officer Ramirez replied without changing expression. You've been asked to leave. That's the law. Zara stood up from her chair, muttering something about not wanting trouble. She slipped past the officers and headed for the house. Camden followed, shaking his head but smart enough not to argue with police. Flynn lingered, looking between Kieran and the officers, but eventually he too headed for the exit. Only Kieran remained, standing by the grill with his jaw set in stubborn defiance. Your choice, Officer Grant said evenly. Leave voluntarily or we escort you out in handcuffs. This is my home, Kieran said, his voice rising. I live here. He can't just throw me out. Actually he can, Officer Ramirez explained patiently. You have no legal tenant rights. No lease, no rent payments, no established residency. You're a guest and guests can be asked to leave. Kieran looked at me with an expression of betrayal and disbelief. You're really doing this? In front of everyone? On my birthday? You said the best gift I could give you was to disappear, I replied. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. The only difference is I'm not the one disappearing. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Kieran's face flushed red with anger and humiliation. Fine, he spat, grabbing his jacket from the deck railing. Enjoy your empty house, old man. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost. He brushed past me, the smell of beer and barbecue smoke trailing after him. But instead of heading for the front door, he stopped at the sliding glass entrance to the house. I need to get my things, he said. Tomorrow, Officer Grant replied. You can arrange a time to collect your belongings, but tonight you need to leave the property. That's when Kieran's composure finally cracked. This is insane. I'm not some random stranger. I'm his son. I've lived here for 29 years. Sir, you need to calm down and leave the property, Officer Ramirez said, his hand moving slightly toward his radio. But Kieran was beyond reasoning. The alcohol, the public humiliation, and the sudden reality of consequences he'd never faced before combined into a toxic mix. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched. You think you win because you have money and property? You think that makes you a man? I should have left years ago instead of wasting my time trying to live up to your impossible expectations. Sir, step back, Officer Grant commanded, moving between us. But Kieran was in full meltdown mode now. He's been controlling me my whole life. Everything I do has to meet his approval. I can't even breathe without him commenting on it. The irony was staggering. Here was my son who hadn't worked in 8 months, who lived entirely off my generosity, who had just publicly stated he wanted me to disappear forever, claiming that I was the one with control issues. That's enough, Officer Ramirez said firmly. You're leaving now or you're going to jail. Kieran spun around and slammed his fist against the sliding glass door. The sound rang across the yard like a gunshot, and I saw several neighbors' porch lights flick on. Kieran Miller, Officer Grant said, pulling out his handcuffs, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and destruction of property. Watching my son get handcuffed on his 29th birthday should have broken my heart. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. This was what accountability looked like. This was what happened when choices met consequences. Kieran struggled against the handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" he shouted over his shoulder as Officer Grant guided him toward the front of the house. "Congratulations, Dad. You finally got rid of the burden." I followed at a distance as they walked him to the patrol car. Neighbors had come out onto their porches. The Hendersons from next door, old Mrs. Chen from across the street, the young couple who'd moved in last spring. They watched in silence as my son was placed in the back of the police cruiser. "Will he be released tonight?" I asked Officer Grant. "Unlikely. Processing will take several hours, and with the destruction of property charge, he'll probably be held until his arraignment. That could be anywhere from 1 to 3 days depending on the court schedule." "And after that?" "Depends on the judge. Could be time served, could be community service, could be a short jail sentence. He'll also have a criminal record." The patrol car pulled away, taking my son into a future I'd never imagined for him. The neighbors gradually went back inside and my house, my property, was finally quiet. I walked back through the rooms that had once echoed with family life. In the kitchen, the birthday cake still sat on the counter, its cheerful message now seeming like a relic from another era. The watch box remained where I'd left it, my grandfather's legacy waiting for someone worthy to receive it. The next morning brought the kind of clarity that only comes from a full night's sleep and a decision made without second-guessing. I woke at 5:47 a.m., made coffee with the precise measurements that had become ritual, and began implementing the systematic plan I'd developed. Anna Morrison called at exactly 8 a.m. as promised. "Mr. Whitmore, I've run the comparables on your property. Given the location, condition, and current market dynamics, I'd recommend listing at $485,000. With the right marketing and a willingness to negotiate, we should have offers within days. What if we priced it at $465,000? There was a pause. "That's aggressive, but it would generate immediate interest. Cash buyers especially would jump on that price point." "Do it. I want this house sold before my son gets out of jail." "How long do we have?" 72 hours, maximum." Anna's voice sharpened with professional excitement. "I'll have the listing live by noon, and I'll call my investor contacts directly. A property this well-maintained at that price point won't last long." While Anna prepared the listing, I began the systematic dismantling of the life Kieran had taken for granted. I called Verizon and removed him from the family phone plan. I contacted our auto insurance company and dropped him from coverage. I canceled his credit cards, the ones I'd been paying off for years, and closed our joint bank account. Each phone call was a small act of liberation. With every canceled service I felt lighter. By noon, I had appointments with 3 different real estate attorneys, a property management company, and a financial advisor. I was approaching this like the engineering project it had become: systematic, thorough, and irreversible. The first cash offer came at 3:17 p.m. Anna called with barely contained excitement. "Mr. Whitmore, we have a full-price offer with a 7-day close. The buyers are a young family, he's a doctor, she's a teacher, and they can provide bank verification of funds today." "Background check them," I said. "I want to know who's getting my house. I'll have their information by end of business." That evening, I drafted the letter I would leave for Kieran. It needed to be clear, factual, and free of emotion. "Kieran, you said the best gift I could give you was to disappear from your life. I've decided to grant that wish, but with a modification. Instead of me disappearing, everything you've taken for granted is disappearing. This house has been sold. The new owners, Dr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, are a family who will appreciate what they've been given. They take possession on Friday. Your phone service has been canceled. Your car insurance has been canceled. Your credit cards have been canceled. You are no longer my financial responsibility in any capacity. You wanted independence from my control. You now have it completely. Don't contact me unless you've learned the difference between independence and responsibility. When you can demonstrate both, we can discuss rebuilding our relationship on terms of mutual respect. I'll be unreachable for the foreseeable future. Dad." I sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote "Kieran" across the front in block letters. Simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret. Dr. Miguel Rodriguez and his wife Carmen arrived for the final walkthrough on Thursday afternoon. They brought their twin daughters, 8-year-old girls who ran through the house with the kind of joy I remembered from Kieran's childhood. "The girls love the backyard," Carmen said, watching them explore the deck I'd built 15 years ago. "Miguel's been promising them a swing set, and this yard is perfect." Dr. Rodriguez was examining the crown molding in the living room with the appreciation of someone who understood craftsmanship. "You've maintained this place beautifully, Mr. Whitmore. It's obvious this was a home where people cared about details." "It was," I said simply. "Are you downsizing for retirement?" Carmen asked. "Something like that. I'm ready for a change." The girls ran up to their mother, breathless with excitement. "Mama, can we have our birthday party here? The deck is perfect for a piñata. If we get the house, Mija. We'll see." I watched this family, parents who worked to provide for children who appreciated what they received, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: satisfaction with a decision well made. "I have one small favor to ask," I said to Dr. Rodriguez. "If a young man named Kieran shows up here asking about me or claiming this is his house, please give him this." I handed him the sealed envelope. "Of course. Family situation. Teaching moment," I said. He nodded with the understanding of someone who'd probably had to deliver difficult news to patients. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. That night, I packed everything I truly needed into 3 suitcases. Clothes for a new climate, important documents, my grandfather's watch, and a few photographs from when Kieran was young. Before entitlement replaced gratitude, before my love became something to exploit rather than cherish. The rest could stay with the house. The new owners could decide what to keep and what to discard, just as I was doing with my relationship with my son. Kieran was released from county jail at 9:15 a.m. on Friday, exactly as the booking officer had predicted. I knew because I'd called to verify. I also knew because I was sitting in my rental car across the street from the house, watching. I hadn't planned to witness his return, but something drew me there. Perhaps the engineers need to observe the results of a carefully calculated experiment. He arrived by taxi, looking disheveled and smaller somehow. 3 days in jail had stripped away the swagger and false confidence. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the house as if something about it seemed different. Then he noticed the moving truck in the driveway. I watched him approach the front door with growing confusion, saw him try his key and discover it didn't work. The doorbell rang and Dr. Rodriguez answered with the polite caution of someone who'd been warned about this moment. From my car, I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Kieran's body language shift from confusion to agitation to something approaching panic. Dr. Rodriguez handed him the envelope, and I watched my son's face as he read his name on the front. He opened it right there on the porch, his eyes scanning the letter once, then again, then a third time as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more palatable. When he looked up from the letter, his gaze swept the street until it found my rental car. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the recognition in his eyes, the understanding that I'd been watching, that this had all been planned with engineering precision. He took 3 steps toward my car, then stopped. Something in his expression changed. The realization that approaching me would only confirm everything I'd written in the letter about his inability to accept consequences. Instead, he folded the letter carefully, put it in his pocket, and began walking down the street with the slow, measured pace of someone who'd finally understood the weight of his choices. I didn't follow him. There was nothing left to say. Over the next 6 weeks, I tracked Kieran's progress through carefully maintained channels. Mutual friends, distant relatives, social media posts that friends of friends would mention. It was like watching a controlled experiment, observing whether the variables I'd changed would produce the hypothesized results. The first week was predictable: anger, blame, attempts to rally sympathy from family members. My sister received 3 phone calls, my brother got a long email, and my ex-wife, Kieran's mother, was subjected to a 2-hour rant about my psychotic overreaction. But families have a way of seeing truth when it's presented clearly. My sister's response was diplomatic but firm. "Honey, you told your father to disappear from your life. He did exactly what you asked for." The second week brought the reality of practical needs. Kieran had to find a place to sleep, a way to eat, a method of transportation. The friends who'd laughed at my expense during his birthday party were notably less available when he needed concrete help. Zara, his girlfriend, lasted exactly 9 days after learning there would be no more free rent, free food, or free entertainment. Her social media posts about toxic family situations and supporting my boyfriend through difficult times gave way to photos of her with other men by the start of week 3. Week 4 was when the real learning began. Flynn called me, a conversation I hadn't expected. "Mr. Whitmore, I just wanted you to know Kieran got a job. It's just dishwashing at a restaurant downtown, but he's been showing up every day." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he asked me not to. He said he didn't want you to think he was looking for praise or trying to get back in your good graces. He's staying at the YMCA and riding the bus to work. He looks different, more serious." I thanked Flynn and hung up without asking for details. If Kieran was learning to support himself, that was information he would share when he was ready. Week 6 brought an unexpected visitor to my new apartment across town. I was reading on my balcony when the building manager called up. "Mr. Whitmore, there's a young man here to see you. Says he's your son." I found Kieran in the lobby wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a simple button-down shirt and khakis that looked like they'd been bought second-hand but were clean and pressed. His hair was shorter and he'd lost weight. But the biggest change was in his eyes. They held something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. "Hi, Dad." "Kieran. Can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" I led him to a small seating area near the lobby windows. We sat across from each other like negotiators from different countries. "I got your letter," he said. "I know. I saw you read it." "You were watching?" I wanted to see if my calculations were correct. He almost smiled at that, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him in months. "Your calculations?" I treated this like an engineering problem. Variables, hypotheses, predicted outcomes. I wanted to know if removing the supports would cause the structure to collapse or force it to develop its own foundation. "And? You're sitting here having worked for 2 weeks straight and paid for your own clothes. The structure is still standing." Kieran looked out the window at the parking lot. "I hated you for about a month." "Only a month?" "Then I realized you did exactly what I asked you to do. You disappeared from my life. The only problem was I discovered that my life without your support was pretty empty." I waited. This was his conversation to drive. "I want to apologize," he said finally. "Not for getting arrested, that was a consequence of my choices. Not for being angry about the house, that was your property to sell. I want to apologize for 29 years of taking your love for granted and treating your generosity like it was my constitutional right." The words were precise, thoughtful, and completely free of the self-pity that had characterized his speech for years. "I spent 3 days in county jail thinking about what you wrote in that letter," he continued. "About the difference between independence and responsibility. I realized I'd been demanding independence while rejecting responsibility my entire adult life. And now I understand that independence isn't something you demand. It's something you earn by becoming responsible for yourself." He paused. "I'm not asking to move back in. I'm not asking for money. I'm just asking if there's a possibility that someday we might be able to have a relationship built on respect instead of resentment." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But what I saw was something I'd been hoping to see for years: genuine accountability. "What does responsibility look like to you now?" I asked. "It looks like getting up at 5:30 a.m. to catch the first bus to work. It looks like eating ramen for dinner because that's what I can afford. It looks like saying, thank you, when someone helps me instead of acting like I deserve their help." He met my eyes directly. "It looks like understanding that nobody owes me anything, including you." We didn't hug. We didn't make grand pronouncements about fresh starts or turning over new leaves. Instead, we agreed to meet for coffee the following Saturday morning, neutral ground, limited time, no pressure for either of us to be anything other than honest. That first coffee meeting lasted 37 minutes. We talked about his job, challenging but honest work, my new apartment, smaller but peaceful, and the weather, safely mundane. When he offered to pay for his own coffee, I let him. The second meeting was 2 weeks later. This time, he brought a small notebook where he'd been tracking his expenses and his work schedule. He showed me his budget with the pride of someone who'd discovered he could solve his own problems. "I'm saving $43 a week," he said. "Not much, but it's something I've never done before." "What's your goal?" "First month's rent and deposit on a small apartment. The YMCA is fine for now, but I want my own space. Something I pay for myself." By the third meeting, a month later, he had achieved that goal. He'd found a studio apartment above a bakery downtown, 450 square feet of independence that he'd earned with his own labor. "I'd like you to see it," he said. "Not because I need your approval, but because I'm proud of it." The apartment was tiny, sparsely furnished, and immaculately clean. A futon, a small table, a bookshelf made from boards and cinder blocks. The refrigerator contained the basics: eggs, bread, milk, peanut butter. The freezer held exactly 4 frozen dinners. "It's not much," Kieran said, "but it's mine." I ran my hand along the windowsill, noting the care he'd taken to clean it properly. "Your grandfather would have approved. He always said a man's first apartment should be small enough to keep clean and cheap enough to keep honest." I remember him saying that. I never understood what it meant before. In the corner of the room, I noticed something that made my throat tighten: a framed photograph of the two of us from his high school graduation. In it, we were both smiling, his arm around my shoulders, neither of us knowing that it would take 14 years and a complete breakdown of our relationship for us to find our way back to genuine respect for each other. Where did you get that photo? I saved it on my phone before you canceled my plan. Had it printed at Walgreens. He looked embarrassed. I know I don't deserve to display it, but it reminds me of who I want to be again. 6 months after Kieran's arrest, I received a call that would have been unimaginable during our years of conflict. Dad? It's Kieran. I got promoted to assistant manager at the restaurant. Comes with a small raise in health insurance. I wanted you to be the first person I told. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and it was earned pride, something he'd never experienced before because he'd never worked for anything long enough to feel it. Congratulations. That's a significant achievement. I've been thinking about something and I wanted to ask your opinion. Not because I need your permission but because I value your perspective. This was new language between us, the language of adults who respected each other's autonomy while still caring about each other's opinions. I'm listening. I want to go back to school. Community college part-time while I keep working. Maybe study business or accounting, something practical that could lead to better career opportunities. What's your plan for financing it? I've been saving. Between the promotion and some careful budgeting, I think I can afford 2 classes per semester. It'll take longer, but I can do it without debt. I was quiet for a moment, not because I disapproved, but because I was processing the transformation of my son from someone who expected everything to be provided into someone who created detailed plans for achieving his goals. I think that's an excellent plan, I said finally. Practical, sustainable, and entirely achievable if you maintain the work ethic you've developed. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. We began meeting monthly after that, always at his initiative, always with updates on his progress. He showed me his grades, B+ average, his savings account balance, growing steadily, and eventually his acceptance letter to transfer to a 4-year university as a junior. I calculated it out, he said, spreading his papers on the coffee shop table like an engineer presenting a project proposal. If I keep working part-time and take classes at night, I can graduate in 3 years with minimal debt. The restaurant is willing to work around my class schedule. Looking at his careful budgets and realistic timelines, I realized he'd developed the methodical approach to problem-solving that I'd tried unsuccessfully to teach him for years. But he'd learned it on his own, through necessity and experience, which made it truly his. 2 years after our relationship restart, Kieran called with news that required a different kind of conversation. Dad, I have something important to tell you. I'm getting married. The woman was named Isabella, a teacher he'd met in one of his night classes. She was practical, kind, and shared his appreciation for simple pleasures and earned achievements. I met her over dinner at a modest restaurant that Kieran insisted on paying for, another sign of how completely his approach to money and relationships had changed. Kieran talks about you constantly, Isabella said. He's very proud of the relationship you two have built. It's different than it used to be, I said carefully. Better, Kieran corrected. It's built on respect now instead of dependence. I never understood the difference before. 6 months later, I stood in the small chapel where they'd chosen to hold their wedding ceremony. Kieran wore a suit he'd saved for and purchased himself, nothing flashy but properly fitted and clearly chosen with care. When he asked me to be his best man, he'd made it clear it wasn't an obligation but an honor he hoped I'd accept. During the reception held in the community center behind the chapel, Kieran approached me with a serious expression. Dad, I have a question to ask you, and I want you to know that no is a perfectly acceptable answer. I waited. I know I forfeited any claim to family traditions when I acted the way I did. But I was wondering if you might consider letting me earn the right to carry Grandpa's watch someday. The question hit me unexpectedly. I'd assumed the watch would remain in my safe deposit box indefinitely, a symbol of a legacy that had been interrupted. What would earning it look like to you? I don't know. That would be your decision. But I'd like to work toward being the kind of man who could honor what it represents. I thought about my grandfather's inscription. A man's worth is measured by his word. Kieran had kept every commitment he'd made since our reconciliation. He'd promised to support himself and he had. He'd promised to build a stable life and he had. He'd promised to treat our relationship with respect and he had. Ask me again in 5 years, I said. If you've continued to live up to your word, we'll talk about it then. His face lit up with something I'd never seen before, hope combined with determination. Not entitlement, not expectation, but the quiet confidence of someone who knew they could earn what they desired. 5 years later, almost to the day, I received another call from Kieran. Dad, Isabella and I are expecting our first child. A boy. The joy in his voice was infectious, but underneath it I heard something else. The weight of impending responsibility and the determination to meet it. Congratulations. How are you feeling about becoming a father? Terrified and excited in equal measure. I keep thinking about all the things I want to teach him, all the mistakes I don't want to repeat. Such as, I want him to understand that privileges are earned, not inherited. That respect is something you show before you demand it. That independence and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. He paused. I want to be the kind of father who sets boundaries because he loves his child, not because he wants to control him. 3 months later I held my grandson for the first time. Lucas Edmund Miller, named after his great-great-grandfather, the man whose watch still waited in my safe deposit box. As I looked at the baby's tiny fingers, I made a decision that felt like the completion of a circle that had been broken for too long. Kieran, I said, I think it's time. He knew immediately what I meant. The next day we went to the bank together, and I retrieved the watch that had waited patiently for its next worthy owner. In the parking lot, I opened the case and lifted out the watch that had measured time for 3 generations of Whitmore men. The inscription was still clearly visible. A man's worth is measured by his word. This belonged to your great-grandfather, I said, placing it in Kieran's hands. He wore it every day for 43 years. I wore it until the day you were arrested. Now it's time for it to keep time for another generation. Kieran's hands trembled slightly as he held the watch. I don't know if I'm worthy of this yet. You've been worthy for 2 years, I said. I just needed to be sure you understood the weight of what it represents. He fastened it around his wrist with the reverence of someone who understood that some gifts are really responsibilities in disguise. Today, as I write this story from my small coastal cottage where I've finally found the peace I'd been seeking, Kieran is 35 years old. He's been promoted to general manager of a small restaurant chain, Isabella is teaching 4th grade, and Lucas is learning to walk with the fearless determination that all children possess before the world teaches them to be careful. They visit me every few months, driving the 6 hours from the city to spend weekends walking on the beach and building sandcastles with my grandson. Lucas calls me Papa, and when he's old enough to understand, I'll tell him about the watch his father wears and what it means to be a man whose worth is measured by his word. Kieran never asks for money, never hints that he needs help, never assumes that my love comes with financial obligations. When he brings gifts, they're small things he's chosen carefully. A book he thought I'd enjoy, a photo of Lucas learning to clap, a card that simply says, "Thank you for teaching me how to be a man." Our relationship isn't perfect, no relationship is, but it's honest. We disagree sometimes, but we disagree as equals who respect each other's right to different opinions. We support each other, but we support each other as adults who don't confuse love with subsidy. The house I sold to the Rodriguez family has been filled with laughter and birthday parties and Christmas mornings for 7 years now. The girls I met as 8-year-olds are teenagers now, and Dr. Rodriguez told me recently that they're both excellent students who understand the value of working for what they want. You were right about that house, he said during a chance encounter at the grocery store. It was meant for a family who would appreciate it. Sometimes I drive past the old neighborhood, not out of nostalgia but out of curiosity about how the story continued without me. The deck I built still hosts barbecues, but now they're attended by people who say, please, and thank you, and help clean up afterward. The yard where Kieran once stood and demanded my disappearance now echoes with the sounds of children who've been taught to be grateful for what they have. The greatest engineering project of my life wasn't designing bridges to withstand natural disasters. It was learning to build boundaries strong enough to withstand the earthquake of enabling love. For 29 years, I'd confused supporting my son with subsidizing his character defects. I'd believed that love meant removing all obstacles from his path, when what he actually needed was to learn to navigate obstacles himself. The night Kieran told me to disappear from his life forever, I thought my world was ending. Instead, it was beginning. By treating his demand as data rather than devastation, by applying engineering principles to family dynamics, I discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone experience the full weight of their choices. The boy who'd wanted me gone forever became the man who calls to share his victories and ask for my advice. The son who'd treated my generosity as weakness became the father who teaches his child that everything worthwhile must be earned. The watch ticks on his wrist now, keeping perfect time as it measures moments of responsibility, accountability, and genuine love. And sometimes, when I see him check the time before leaving for work or while helping Lucas with a puzzle, I can almost hear my grandfather's voice saying the words that started it all. A man's worth is measured by his word, Nathaniel. Everything else is just noise. The noise has finally stopped. What remains is the steady rhythm of time well spent and love well earned. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with someone you love? Have you experienced the difference between enabling and supporting? Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to experience the natural consequences of their choices. Family relationships built on mutual respect rather than dependence create stronger foundations for everyone involved. If you enjoyed this story about the power of boundaries and the importance of earning what we value, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, family dynamics, and the wisdom that comes from holding people accountable to their words. Thank you for joining me on this journey of transformation and healing.